Have you ever had that spark of a brilliant idea? Maybe it's a side hustle, a new product at work, or, even a complete business concept.
Uh-huh.
You get really excited, you map it all out in your head, and then,
Hmm.
well, that little voice creeps in, the one?
Yeah, I do.
It whispers, okay, but can this actually work? Is this just like a pipe dream, or is it something real?
That exact moment, that crucial question, that's precisely where something called a feasibility analysis comes in.
Okay.
It's really designed to give your big idea a rigorous reality check. You do it before you commit serious time, energy, and, well, money.
Right. It's kind of like building a bridge.
Yeah?
You don't just start laying asphalt across a canyon, do you?
No, definitely not.
You've got to study the ground, the materials, the engineering challenges. You have to figure out if it's even possible, let alone safe and, financially sound.
And a feasibility analysis does exactly that, but for a proposed project or a business idea. And the sources we've looked at, they make it really clear this isn't just for, like, brand new startups launching something.
Interesting.
Yeah, existing businesses use this tool constantly. For major strategic decisions, think launching a big new product line, maybe acquiring another company, adding expensive new equipment, or even relocating their whole operations.
So pretty broad application then.
Very broad.
Our goal for this deep dive is really to unpack the most valuable bits from these articles and videos you shared. We want to give everyone listening a sort of shortcut to understanding what a feasibility analysis actually is, why it's so critical, and maybe most importantly, how you can apply its principles to check out your own ideas.
Yeah, definitely. By the end of this, you should have a much clearer picture of how to evaluate if an idea is truly viable. Looking beyond just the initial excitement to the technical, the financial, the operational realities, and a few other key areas too.
Okay, so let's start right at the beginning then. How do the sources actually define this concept, feasibility analysis?
Well, what's consistent across all of them is that it's a comprehensive evaluation. They describe it as figuring out if a proposed project or business idea is technically, economically, and operationally viable.
Okay, those three seem key. Technical, economic, operational.
They are, and one source adds, quite simply, that it's about assessing the practicality and potential success. So it's not just about whether you could physically do something,
Right.
but whether you should, because it's genuinely achievable and actually likely to succeed out there in the real world.
So the main purpose then sounds like it's really about minimizing risk.
Absolutely. That's the number one driver, really. By identifying potential issues, challenges, risks really early on, you dramatically reduce the chances of pouring resources into something that's, fundamentally flawed or just highly unlikely to work out. It gives you these critical insights that drive better decision making.
And helps make sure resources go where they should.
Exactly. Allocating resources wisely.
That focus on just preventing costly mistakes, that seems huge.
It really is. And the core question it's ultimately designed to answer is pretty direct. It's basically, should we proceed with this specific action plan? It forces a clear-eyed look at the proposal.
Now, something the sources highlighted quite a bit, and it seems like a common mix-up. People confusing a feasibility analysis with a business plan. Can you clarify that difference for us?
Yes, this is a really important point. The sources are very firm on this. A feasibility study is not the same thing as a business plan.
Huh.
In fact, they really stress that you conduct the feasibility study first.
The order matters.
Right.
Why is that sequence so crucial?
Well, think about it. The feasibility study investigates whether the whole idea or plan is viable in the first place. It's like the initial filter.
Got it.
Only after that study determines the idea is viable, then you create the business plan. And the business plan, that outlines the specific actions, the strategies, the steps you need to actually execute that now validated idea.
So you don't plan how to build the bridge until the study confirms the ground can actually support it.
Exactly that. Perfect analogy. Feasibility validates the concept. The business plan details the execution.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
And like you mentioned earlier, it's used anytime a big strategic decision needs that kind of rigorous check.
Precisely. Whether it's a whole new business, a major new product, a big investment in equipment, an acquisition, or even just a significant change in how you operate or where you're located.
Okay, so we get what it is and when to use it. Let's talk about why it's actually worth the effort. What are the major benefits the sources pointed out?
Well, beyond risk reduction, which, as we said, is huge,
Right.
the sources really emphasize that it leads to more informed and objective decision-making.
Instead of just gut feeling.
Exactly. Instead of relying only on intuition or, pure enthusiasm, which is great but not enough, you're basing your decision on actual data, research, analysis. It gives decision makers these data-driven insights, which makes the case for going ahead or not going ahead much, much stronger.
And I guess data-driven decisions usually mean you use your resources better, too.
Precisely. That's another key benefit. By figuring out what's viable and what's not, or maybe where the biggest hurdles are, you make sure that your valuable money, time, and people are directed towards the opportunities with the highest probability of success. You avoid wasting those resources on ventures that have critical, maybe unfixable flaws.
So it basically gives you vital intelligence before you commit the big bucks.
Yes, exactly. It provides management or entrepreneurs with crucial insights they absolutely need before investing significant time and capital. And it also forces you to get a much deeper understanding of the venture itself.
How so?
Well, how it would actually operate day to day, what the potential obstacles might be, who the competition really is, and the specifics of your target market. You learn a lot just by doing the study.
Okay, here's a benefit that really stood out, especially for maybe new ventures.
Yeah.
It can seriously help in getting support, like funding.
Oh, absolutely. That's a key takeaway. If you can present a thorough feasibility study, it demonstrates due diligence to potential investors, to bankers.
Shows you've done your homework.
Exactly. It shows you haven't just, dreamed up an idea on a napkin. You've actually examined its practicality from all these different angles. And that significantly boosts their confidence and makes securing funding much, much easier.
So it's not just about convincing yourself. It's about having the ammo to convince others, backed by solid research.
Yeah, it confirms market opportunities, it helps you really nail down the target market, and it creates that essential documentation detailing the expected costs and benefits. And that includes, crucially, a robust financial analysis.
Okay, the benefits are definitely compelling. You've got risk mitigation, smarter decisions, efficient resources, better shot at funding. But to get those benefits, you mentioned looking at the idea from many different angles. The sources talk about these many dimensions of feasibility. What does that mean in practice?
It just means that viability isn't, just one single thing. It's not a simple yes-no on one factor. The sources break it down into several key areas, different lenses you have to look through to analyze the idea properly.
All right, let's unpack some of the main ones then. Technical feasibility, it seems like a really fundamental place to start.
It is. It basically asks, do you have or can you reasonably get the necessary technology, the equipment, the infrastructure, the technical skills, the expertise to actually make this thing work?
Can your team handle it?
Yeah. Can your existing team, or maybe a team you could realistically build, handle the technical demands? The sources mentioned SpaceX assessing the massive engineering challenges of reusable rockets. That's a great example. Can the physics, the materials, the engineering actually achieve the goal? Is it possible?
And even if the tech is possible, there's the operational side, right? Can you actually run it?
That's operational feasibility, sometimes called organizational feasibility. This looks more internally at your capacity. Can your organization physically, process-wise, resource-wise actually do this on a day-to-day basis?
So the nitty-gritty of making it happen.
Yeah. It assesses your internal resources. Like, do you have the right people? Do you have the management expertise? Are your current processes suitable, or do they need changing? What about workflow? And can you sustainably access the resources you'll need over time? One source pointed to Google evaluating if their existing talent pool and their, vast infrastructure were actually sufficient to launch and support something as huge as the Google Cloud Platform.
Okay, so technical is...
Right. How much profit, essentially, do you expect to get back relative to what you put in? It also forces you to ask, do we need external funding? What's the actual financial cost if this whole thing fails? And, crucially, when can we realistically expect to break even?
Sounds intense.
It is. Sources give examples like Netflix modeling the, colossal costs and expected revenues from making their own original content, or Tesla analyzing the financial viability of building a gigafactory. Huge numbers.
Those are massive calculations you absolutely have to get right, or as right as possible. What about market feasibility? Is there anyone who actually wants this?
Exactly. This is looking outwards at the market. Is there a real, genuine market for this idea? Who is your specific target audience? How big is that market? Is it growing, shrinking, stable? What are the current trends, customer preferences, buying patterns?
And the competition.
Can't ignore them. Who are they? What are they good at? What are their weaknesses? And then the big question, What's your unique selling proposition? What's your competitive edge? Why would customers choose you?
Any examples here?
Well, Apple's analysis before the iPhone showing that huge pent-up demand for smartphones, that's a classic case of market feasibility research pointing towards a massive win. Sources also mention Starbucks reviewing local laws before entering China, which kind of bridges market analysis with the next one.
Which is legal and regulatory feasibility.
Correct. This is all about compliance. Does the idea meet all the necessary laws, regulations? Do you need special licenses, permits, certifications? Are there potential legal liabilities you need to consider? Are there specific regulatory constraints or maybe even protections within that industry that could impact your project?
So, like the Starbucks example again.
Yeah, that fits here too. Understanding foreign business laws, intellectual property rights in China, specific food and beverage regulations, all that falls under legal and regulatory feasibility.
Okay, those feel like the big common pillars: technical, operational, financial, market, legal. But I noticed one source mentioned a few other, maybe more nuanced areas.
They did, yeah, which adds some interesting depth. One source talked about personality feasibility.
Personality, how does that work?
It's quite interesting. It involves analyzing the entrepreneur or the core team, maybe using something like a SWOT analysis.
SWOT: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats.
Right. It basically asks, do you, the person driving this, or your key team members, have the inherent abilities, the resilience, the personality traits needed to handle this specific project? And if not, can you realistically get the help or develop the skills you need?
Wow, that's a powerful point. Sometimes the idea is solid, but maybe the people aren't the right fit without some serious support or changes.
Exactly. And the same source also highlighted time feasibility.
How long will it take?
Pretty much.
Okay.
Is the projected timeline realistic? How long until you can launch and actually start generating revenue? If it's going to take, say, 5 years just to get started, does that kill the idea's viability in the current market? Or can you find ways to speed things up?
Right, time is often the silent killer of good ideas.
It really can be. Industry feasibility was also mentioned, focusing on the existing competition and specific regulatory hurdles for entering that particular industry, which, as we noted, overlaps quite a bit with market and legal feasibility.
Okay.
Then there was cultural feasibility. This asks if the proposed product or idea is, socially acceptable within the target market's norms and values. Could cultural resistance lead to rejection or maybe just much lower revenue than you expect?
That feels increasingly important in our globalized world.
Absolutely. And commercial feasibility was discussed. This is closely related to financial and market feasibility. It focuses really sharply on the probability of commercial success.
Like will itself.
Yeah. Realistic sales volumes, pricing strategies, how sensitive your sales are to price changes, ROI again, how long could the business survive with no sales, time to break even, need for external finance. It's a very focused look at the sales and profit viability.
And finally, there's a specific mention of feasibility when you're thinking about buying an existing business.
Yes, the sources noted that evaluating an acquisition needs its own flavor of feasibility analysis. You'd ask questions like, why is the current owner really selling? What's the business's actual track record, its current health? Who's the competition? What are the assets truly worth? What about the location, pros and cons? Is buying this specific business a sound investment compared to, say, starting from scratch or buying a different one?
Okay, it's definitely clear this isn't just a simple checklist. It's a really deep examination from a lot of different perspectives. So how do you actually do one of these comprehensive studies? The sources seem to outline a pretty structured process.
They do. And while the exact format can vary, there's generally a common sequence of steps people follow. It usually kicks off with step 1, conduct a preliminary analysis.
It sounds like that quick sanity check you mentioned before diving too deep.
Exactly that. It's a pre-screening. Look for those immediate, obvious, insurmountable roadblocks right at the start. Like, does the idea require a budget 10 times bigger than anything you could possibly raise? Is there a fundamental legal constraint that just makes it impossible from day one? You outline the core idea, get a general feel for the market, the commercial concept, note any really unique aspects, and try to identify any fatal risks straight away.
So if there's an obvious deal breaker,
you stop right there. You avoid spending a ton of time and effort studying an idea that's clearly not going anywhere.
Smart. Don't waste resources on a non-starter.
Okay, so if it passes that initial sniff test, what's step 2?
Step 2 is define the project scope and analyze the current situation. This is where you decide exactly which of those feasibility dimensions we just talked about are the most critical for this specific idea. Which ones will you include in the study?
So you tailor the study. Yes. You clearly state the study's objectives. And you also analyze your current business or situation. What are your strengths, weaknesses before you take this potential action? How might different parts of your current operation be affected? What are you actually hoping to gain? Specific cost savings, new revenue, strategic advantages.
Okay, scope defined, current state understood.
Yeah.
Then comes the heavy lifting part.
Step 3, detailed research and data collection. Yep, this is where you roll up your sleeves and gather all the specific information needed for the feasibility areas you defined in the scope.
Like what kind of info?
Market research data, getting detailed cost estimates, documenting the technical requirements, researching the specific legal angles, gathering operational data, talking to potential suppliers, maybe even potential customers. This step can take time, but it's the absolute foundation of the whole analysis.
And you can't really analyze your idea in a vacuum, right?
Yeah.
So step 4 involves looking at competitors and existing solutions.
Yes, you absolutely need context. Whether you're proposing a new product, a new service, or even just implementing new software internally, you've got to research the competitive landscape. How does your proposal actually stack up against what's already out there?
What are its pros and cons compared to theirs?
Exactly. What are the advantages? What are the disadvantages? What are customers currently using or doing? What are they really looking for? And does your idea genuinely meet those needs better than the existing options?
Okay, so once you have all that data, your own projections, market info, competitor analysis, step 5 is the core analysis itself.
That's right. This is where you really dig into the data you collected for each of the relevant feasibility components: technical, financial, market, operational, legal, etc. You analyze the specific risks and opportunities within each area.
Looking for roadblocks.
Identifying potential roadblocks, absolutely. One source suggested creating a risk assessment map here, which can be really useful. You visually plot potential problems based on how likely they are to happen versus how big their impact would be if they did.
Like mapping out the potential minefield. Sounds necessary, but maybe a bit intense. And a critical part of that analysis has got to be the financial side, right? Step 6.
Oh, absolutely critical. Step 6, understand the financial costs thoroughly. This demands really detailed calculation. What are the specific resources needed? People, equipment, facilities, marketing spend, everything.
And where does the money come from?
Yeah, where will the funds come from? Internal budgets, loans, outside investment. Then you need to project realistic benefits, sales forecasts, productivity gains, cost reductions. Determine that break-even point. When do you expect cumulative revenue to finally equal cumulative costs?
And assess the risks.
Assess the financial risks, what could go wrong with the numbers, and calculate the financial costs if the whole project actually fails. The sources really hammer this point. Be realistic, even conservative with these figures. Don't rely on overly optimistic projections.
Yeah, wishful thinking in spreadsheets is a common trap.
A major one. Okay, so step 7 is review and analyze all data. You bring everything together. Compile all the findings from the different sections into one comprehensive report or overview.
And then step back.
Exactly. Step back and review the whole picture carefully, holistically. Look for inconsistencies. Does the market analysis actually support the sales projections you made? Are the technical requirements really feasible within the budget you set? Are there any legal or regulatory hurdles that seem just too big, like a major red flag on their own?
What if you find big risks?
The sources suggest having contingency plans outlined for any major risks you identify. Importantly, a feasibility analysis doesn't always give you a simple, clean yes or no, but it forces you to ask, helpfully answer, all the right questions before making a commitment.
It brings clarity to what's often a very complex decision, which leads right into step 8, review and decision-making.
This is the moment of truth. The stakeholders, the decision makers, they take the comprehensive report, they weigh all the pros and cons laid out, and based on all that data and analysis, they make the informed go or no-go decision about actually proceeding with the proposed project or venture.
And if it's a go, what happens then?
Then comes step 9. Create an action plan. If the feasibility study confirms the idea is viable and the decision is go, the final step is to develop a detailed action plan. This outlines the specific steps needed for execution, sets timelines, assigns resources and responsibilities, and defines the overall strategy for moving forward. You now have the green light and a solid foundation informed by that deep feasibility dive.
That step-by-step process really makes it feel much more concrete, more manageable. It's not just some abstract management concept.
Right.
And seeing it applied in real situations helps too. What kind of examples did the sources provide?
They gave several really compelling illustrations. One was a university that had an outdated science building and wanted to upgrade and expand it. Their feasibility study looked at things like construction costs, potential community concerns, local zoning laws, the technology infrastructure needed for modern science, the benefits for students and research,
And the money side.
and, of course, the projected financials, how they would actually fund it. They looked at options like bonds, using endowment funds, potentially adjusting tuition revenue.
And what was the result of that study?
The study ultimately showed viability. It confirmed the project was technically possible, legally permissible, financially achievable, and offered significant benefits. So it led to the project getting the green light, the approval to move forward.
Okay, that's a pretty contained project, relatively speaking. What about something on a much, much larger scale?
Well, a really prominent example cited was the study done in Washington state exploring a potential high-speed rail line. This would connect Vancouver, Seattle, and Portland.
Wow, okay. That's huge.
Huge. A massive undertaking. The feasibility study for that had to cover incredibly complex aspects, things like potential governance structures, how to engage dozens, maybe hundreds of different stakeholders, and, as you can imagine, extremely detailed financials. The estimated costs were in the range of $24 billion to $42 billion.
Just the cost range alone shows you why you'd need a study like this.
Absolutely. And the study didn't just look at costs. It explored diverse funding sources, significant government investment, but also potential private sector contributions. Microsoft was mentioned as an interested party, for instance.
And the benefits.
It also projected massive potential benefits, things like an estimated $355 billion in regional economic growth over time, improved access to jobs and housing across the corridor, and, of course, significant relief for traffic congestion.
So for a project that big, the study isn't just yes or no.
No, not at all. It's about laying out the colossal potential, yes, but also the immense costs, the complexities, the potential paths forward. It provides that essential foundation for making major political and investment decisions.
That really highlights how it informs strategy at the very highest levels. Were there any examples from the private sector, maybe product development?
Yes, definitely. One example was a consumer goods company thinking about launching a significant new product line.
Okay.
Their study covered market research. Was there real consumer interest? Who were the competitors? It looked at technical feasibility. What R&D was needed? Could they scale production? Were there patent issues? It included financial projections, of course, and organizational readiness. Did they have the right teams, the right internal structures, and naturally legal compliance for this new product category?
So a study touching on many of those dimensions we discussed earlier: market, technical, financial, operational, legal.
Precisely. And the outcome. It identified a promising market opportunity. And importantly, having that documented viability from the study helped the company secure the internal funding they needed and allocate the necessary resources for development and launch.
Real estate development seems like another area where this would be absolutely essential.
It is, and there was an example of that too. A developer was assessing whether to buy a piece of land to build a new residential community.
What did their study involve?
It was pretty extensive.
Yeah.
Detailed local market analysis, site planning, looking at capacity, environmental constraints, a comprehensive legal review covering zoning, permits, environmental regulations, sophisticated financial modeling, naturally. They even went as far as creating an opening balance sheet projection and doing sensitivity analysis.
Sensitivity analysis, meaning they looked at how the numbers change if key assumptions fluctuate, like sales prices or construction costs.
Exactly. How sensitive are the potential profits to changes in those key variables? And the study concluded the project was viable, but it also identified some significant risks.
So what did the developer do?
They made a smart adjustment. Instead of just going full steam ahead or abandoning the idea, they revised the project's scope and decided to adopt a phased approach to development. This directly addressed and mitigated some of the specific risks the study had flagged.
That's a great outcome. The study didn't just say yes or no, it led to a smarter, less risky way forward. And the sources mentioned this tool isn't just for huge projects or companies, it applies to smaller ventures too.
Yes, absolutely. They specifically noted examples of feasibility studies being done for setting up much smaller businesses, things like a local bakery, a water refilling station, even a small poultry farm. It really shows that the tool scales up or down and is valuable regardless of the project's size or complexity.
Okay, so it's clearly a critical, really versatile tool. Now, you mentioned earlier the important distinction between a feasibility analysis and a business plan. How does it relate to some other common planning tools or documents people might use? Getting the terminology right seems helpful.
Yeah, understanding its specific place in the overall planning ecosystem is key. The sources compared it to a few related concepts. First, let's maybe revisit market research versus feasibility analysis, just to be crystal clear.
Okay, we touched on it, but let's nail down that boundary.
So market research, when compared directly like this, is often seen as more granular, more micro in focus. Its primary job is specifically understanding the market itself. Who are the customers? What do they prefer? What are their buying habits? What are the trends? How big is the market? Where are the specific opportunities within it? It answers questions mainly about the market.
And the feasibility analysis is broader than that.
Much broader, more macro. It absolutely uses market findings. In fact, good market research is often a critical input to a feasibility study, but it looks at the entire proposed project or business as a whole system. Its focus is on the overall practicality and viability across multiple dimensions: technical, financial, operational, legal, including the market picture.
So market research helps you understand the playing field.
And feasibility analysis helps you decide if you should even get on that field, given all the conditions, your resources, the tech required, the cost, the risks, and the market potential.
That's a really helpful way to frame it. Okay, what about the difference between a feasibility study and something called a project charter?
Right. A project charter is typically a much shorter, often less formal document. Think of it as an initial pitch to stakeholders.
Like an elevator pitch?
Sort of, yeah. It outlines the project's high-level objectives, the basic scope, potential benefits. It's meant to get initial buy-in. And critically, the sources note it's usually ratified or approved before you start the detailed feasibility study.
Okay, so the charter is the initial, here's the idea, what do you think, document. And if people say, yeah, it looks interesting, then you do the deep dive with the feasibility study to see if that idea is actually achievable and makes sense.
Precisely. The charter gets the conversation started. The feasibility study tests the reality. It's a similar relationship with something called a business case.
How does that fit in?
A business case is generally more formal and detailed than a charter. It's often used for larger, more complex projects and usually includes more upfront financial information for senior decision makers. Like the charter, it's also typically approved before the feasibility study begins.
So similar purpose, get initial approval to investigate further.
Yes. And if the subsequent feasibility study then uncovers significant challenges or changes the financial picture, you might need to go back to those stakeholders with an updated business case based on the new findings.
Okay, so charter or business case is the initial, is this aligned with our goals? Or is this worth exploring further? Right. And the feasibility study is the much more detailed, can we actually execute this successfully and is it worth the risk? Reality check.
That distinction is really key. And finally, just to reinforce the relationship between a feasibility study and a business plan, which we talked about at the start.
Right. The business plan comes after the feasibility study confirms viability.
Exactly. A business plan typically outlines the overall strategic direction and goals for an entire organization, especially when it's starting out or maybe undergoing a major strategic shift. It's the big picture, long-term roadmap for the business itself. A feasibility study, on the other hand, evaluates the practicality and viability of a specific individual project or initiative that the organization might undertake in order to help achieve the broader goals outlined in that business plan.
Ah, okay. So the business plan might say, our goal is to expand into sustainable products. And then you might do a feasibility study on one specific sustainable product idea to see if that particular path makes sense to help achieve the overall goal.
That's an excellent analogy. Exactly right.
So pulling this all together then, it sounds like a feasibility analysis is really far from just being some bureaucratic stack you have to tick off.
Absolutely not. The sources consistently frame it as an indispensable, proactive tool. It's for genuinely understanding the potential, yes, but also the challenges, the risks, and the overall viability of any proposed project or venture before you commit those significant resources.
And the payoff seems huge. It allows you to move forward with real confidence when an idea is truly viable. Or, maybe just as valuable, it gives you the hard data to pivot or even abandon a concept early when it's just not going to work.
Which saves immense amounts of time, money, and, frankly, potential heartache down the road.
Yeah. It takes that initial excitement and passion for an idea, which is essential but it tempers it or validates it with objective data and rigorous structured analysis.
It forces you to look beyond just the shiny concept to the practical realities of actually executing it, whether the market will accept it and if it can be financially sustainable.
Thinking about all these different dimensions we've discussed, the technical, financial, market, operational, legal, even things like personality and cultural feasibility, it really does change the way you might evaluate opportunities, doesn't it?
It absolutely should. And maybe that raises an important final thought for everyone listening. How might applying even a sort of mini feasibility check, just consciously thinking through a few of these critical dimensions systematically, how might that change the way you approach significant decisions in your own life or work?
Whether it's a business idea you've been kicking around.
Or maybe a major personal investment like buying a house or going back to school, or even just a big project you're considering taking on at work or in your community.
What idea are you currently entertaining right now that might really benefit from this kind of clear-eyed, multidimensional evaluation before you jump in with both feet?